the system that's in place here in Indonesia is, is money politics.
What kind of resistance did you face?
And more people because of the judicial system, and I'm not saying dying because of conflict, but dying because they can't make money. This is my personal opinion.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Busy, but good.
How's your candidacy going? What are you running for?
It's going. We're still in the preparation stage. I mean, my candidacy is very different from what it is usually because I wasn't the one who was aiming to run. I was actually asked to run by my party, so I was mandated by my party to run. So in this sense, there was no preparation on my end. It was pretty much spur of the moment. But of course, I was prepared, but prepared in a sense that within like 2-3 months prepared. So there was no team, there was no vision, mission, and programs in place. So that's what we're focused on right now. We are making sure we are just actually this afternoon we're just about to finalize the program that we're going to be having in place.
How long is the program? Like what, how much have you come up with?
Well,
is this an Elizabeth Warren situation?
So this is a city. It's not a provincial, level. So, because it's a city and it's quite a small one at that. But it's small, but it has so much potential, and it at the same time, it is probably the most modern, smart satellite city of Jakarta because it's just in the outskirts. So it's part of the greater Jakarta area. But it's not Jakarta, and it's just on the outskirts. And so in terms of its programs, we're focusing on a few things. Number one, of course, is the good governance aspect. And then number two, we're talking about how a lot of our programs will be community-based, moving the people along, because I think what's been happening so far here is that the leaders have been almost dictating, basically saying this is how it should be, these are the programs, without the involvement of the people. So we want to ensure that the people and the especially those who live here are involved in the decision making and of course in the implementation of the regulations. So we have community-based, and then of course we're talking about empowerment, whether it's people empowerment, community empowerment in general, but specifically, especially in relation to what I have been focused on in the past few years as an activist for women and children, female empowerment, women empowerment. So we're talking about programs to do with economic empowerment, training, especially with COVID-19, it's hitting people very hard. I can keep going.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you off. Sorry. So would you say that economic concerns is kind of like the number one issue right now for constituents?
Especially, yeah, for sure. Especially because of the COVID-19 situation. Yeah. As much as we'd like to, focus on other things, I think that would be the priority, is getting people to get back on their feet and be able to be independent again. That's our priority.
I want to take a step back a little bit and just briefly talk about your background until leading up to this moment.
Sure.
Yeah, because you started with acting in a non-traditional route to life. And then what?
Completely. Yes.
What was the moment? What was behind that turn?
Transition.
For you? Yeah. What was the defining moment for you?
To go into politics, or?
Yeah, to go into politics.
Yeah. Right. So for those who know me, they know that pre-politic days, I was completely, I would say I was even allergic to politics here in Indonesia. I know it's a very hard word, but it's the truth. And the reason for that is because of how politicians are usually, and I think that's the same all over the world. It's very rare to find politicians with integrity. I mean, they would say one thing and then it would end up being completely another thing, or nothing at all. And so the defining moment was on my birthday was kind of like the first, on my birthday in January 2013, so 27th January. My brother and my cousins, knowing that I'm an activist in the fight against human trafficking since 2009, and I founded my own foundation, they basically said, look, Sara, if you want to make a difference, a big difference nationally, you need to be in the system. Otherwise, you'll just be like so many other people who are barking at the door, right? Who are, basically shouting and trying to make a difference from the outside. But it won't make as big an impact as if you
if you're joining,
if you were inside. Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's like,
so that was kind of that was very disturbing for me. Disturbing in the sense that it was such a challenge, and again so I had an inner struggle that was happening for 3 weeks after that, and it was in the third week on Friday that, because my birthday was on a Sunday, and it was 3 weeks after that on a Friday where God basically spoke to me and said, if you can say no, I mean, that's completely your right. You can say no, but if you say no, then the cost that it will be paid won't be paid by just you. It will be paid by those that I can help through you. And I really felt that in my soul. I really felt that, and I mean, I was bawling my eyes out. People like the people around my family were just like, what is going on? Like, here at the breakfast table, and she's bawling her eyes out. And so that was the defining moment. That was the defining moment for me, because I was still in my PJs when that happened. And so it was like a week after that I decided to sign up and join there was a process happening for us to apply as candidates for Congress to run for Congress.
And then you got into office. Congratulations on that achievement.
Thank
your
you.
First run.
Thank you.
And then I guess once you are in power in Congress, like, what was it hard for you to maintain the idealism? How do you juggle practicality and idealism?
Wow, that's a really great question, because I'm quite the idealist, and that was actually the reason. Again, that was part of the reason why I was so allergic to politics. Is because I'm such an idealist, and I knew politics drains me, right? I mean, when you're faced with people who say one thing and do completely the other, and I was surrounded by it. I mean, I had to mentally prepare myself. Right? I had to mentally build up these barriers and these walls, and just kind of, and I mean, I was already, even during campaign, I was already meeting with so much resistance, because the system that's in place here in Indonesia is money politics.
What kind of resistance did you face?
Well, number one, I refused to play the game, so to speak, right? So I did, usually when people come to meet with a candidate, they go home with money, and I did not give that to them, so I had my team basically pulling their hair out. They're like,
they were stressed out.
Does she actually want to win? They were stressed out. They were like, does she actually want to win? How is she going to do this? And so I was already going against the grain, going against how the system has been all this time, and so that was how I met with resistance. I mean, people were just completely, they didn't believe that I could get a seat. I mean, they were like, oh my gosh, the way she's doing it, she's
so
out of her
idealistic.
mind. So idealistic.
It's all about proposals.
Exactly. And so I got into So that prepared me. But I mean, the way I juggle, back again to your question, how juggling it. I think putting it into perspective and into proportion. If we say there won't be any like considerations as to like how money is being spent at all, I think that would be unrealistic. So the way I put into the realistic side is, as long as I do not basically spend the money that I receive that is in my control, under my control, to be able to spend it how I wish for the people, as long as I don't do it like basically I'm not breaking any laws with it, as long as I do it fairly, then that's how I
anyway, that's about elections. Like, once you are actually in Congress, on a daily basis, working with other people, did you feel like you can also started to understand why the system is the way it is, or you're like, okay, like, this is impossible?
For sure. Absolutely. And in a way, I think the media is, and I don't want to sound like the usual politician that blames it all on the media, but walking in those shoes and being in the system, seeing how it's being done, seeing how the people work, it opened up my eyes to the reality, and it's not the way media portrays us to be. I wasn't the only one who was there every single day. I wasn't the only one who was working hard to represent our constituents. There were other congressmen and congresswomen who were fighting the good fight. And
what do you think is the rough proportion of that?
Oh yeah, well, we were the minority.
Like 20%, 10%.
No, it's not. It's actually not that bad.
Okay.
I would say more like 45%.
Okay.
So it's not that bad at all. I mean, it really depends on, because here's the thing: even if they weren't there, usually they're with their constituents. So it's not that they're not even doing their jobs. And this is something that here in Indonesia they don't really quite understand that, because in America, for example, when they're voting, they only go into the room when they're about to be called out, right? But otherwise, they would stay in their room and receive constituents, and it's like a revolving door.
Right.
I mean, I saw that myself when I went to Capitol Hill. So, but here in Indonesia, they're not used to that. They just think, oh, you're supposed to be sitting there, attending meetings, and that's
really
it.
Long meetings.
And really long, sometimes very ineffective meetings. Okay, let's just be honest here, because a lot of the things that can be very effective is actually done behind the scenes. It's not behind doors. It's not done there. Over there is for people who want to be seen, like, oh, I'm here attending meeting, and let me take a picture.
Right. It's also, it seems to me like, what is at the heart of the, difficulty of working together as a Congress? There's lags. There's so many undang-undang and all of them that's just like still and delayed and all of that kind of stuff. And it's quite interesting because Indonesian political parties are not like, there's multiple political parties and they work together, unlike America and Democrat, Republican. So there's the tension of like, why is there so many delays? Exactly.
This is kind of, so it's like a pro and con. It really depends on the situation. It depends on the legislation. It depends on the bill. It depends on the political stance and the political climate. All of that plays into how lobbying is done, how decisions are made. And one thing that I think is very different and is very Indonesian in how we make decisions is the musyawarah mufakat aspect.
Right.
Right, because in America it's voting, and I think a lot of the younger generation here in Indonesia think that it's the same way, that everything is doing by voting, but that is not the truth. The truth is, even though it's individuals have a right to say something, most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, legislations are being done, are being taken, decisions are being made by the factions. And so in the previous period, there were 10 factions. This time there are 9. So can you imagine if one faction does not agree with the legislation, that could actually make them have to do a voting.
Right.
So
it's like you need to have like a universal consensus instead of majority consensus.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think do you think that will change in Indonesia, or like is it just so deep a part of our culture?
Yeah, the aspect of a unifying voice is so much a part of our culture. It's going to be very difficult to change that.
What is it different with younger candidates? No.
You know what? No. I have hope. If the younger generation of leaders, the next generation of leaders, are strong enough to stand independent of their forebearers, right? There could be a change, but at the same time, I'm not sure how independent they are, in the sense that a lot of them care about their constituents' opinion, right? Because it's all about being voted back in. Okay, and our constituents are still mostly very conservative in how they view how decisions should be made. So, for example, they might be okay with the changing of indirect and direct voting, but so maybe the older generation might be more inclined towards the indirect voting, but then the younger generation would be more for the direct voting. But then those who understand the situation here in Indonesia would say, yeah, but you know what? The younger generation might not know what they're talking about. And
there's also that aspect of, respecting elders, in Indonesia. So
and all of that. So in terms of whether it's going to be still the musyawarah mufakat or the voting aspect, I think really depends on how we evolve. As a civilization. It really does depend on that.
Right. And, do you think that when you lobby people, when you lobby factions, even now today in your candidacy, this is kind of a different tangent, but I kind of want to talk to you about it. Do you think being a woman and a Christian woman affects how you are perceived and how you have to run?
So this is very interesting, because with my experience when I was in in Congress or House of Rep, it didn't affect that much. It was more, so it wasn't about me being a woman, depending on the subject matter. You see what I mean? So if we're talking about something that's very general, they don't see that I'm a woman and that I'm a non-Muslim and all of it. No, they don't see that actually. And I was very pleasantly surprised of that. And they were very supportive of me breastfeeding my son.
That's awesome.
So all that went viral of like a parliamentarian or representative in the EU, and all that. Like we are doing it too here, we're doing it as well. So it's nothing new, but so I was the one who brought my baby along. But in terms of, when it comes to sensitive gender legislations, for example, the sexual abuse eradication bill, yes, it plays. It plays very large, because it's quite controversial, because it touches on people's ideology. Somehow it does, okay? Because
somehow it does. I'm not sure of the connection necessarily, but
but the way they see it mainly is because of how they see women. So if we're talking about the Disabilities Act, right? The Persons with Disabilities Act or the social workers, they look to a woman's voice. They actually do, and they put value in it. But when it comes to a woman saying, I have a right over my own body, that's it. Out the door, out the window, because then it challenges everything that they believe. Because, you know, they're like, oh my gosh, if we say a woman has a right over her own body, then it's almost as if, you know, we're going against their belief system.
Right.
So that's why it gets very sensitive.
And do you think it's different when you're vying for a Congress seat versus, you know, a mayoral seat? Is there a lot of regional changes?
Oh, for sure. Yes. People are a lot more accepting of minorities going for positions of power in the legislative body.
Okay.
But they are less forgiving, and they're a bit more, they play the politik identitas, right? Identity politics of whether someone is from what area, whether they are putra daerah, right? Someone who's originally from the area, or whether or not they're a Muslim, they're a Christian, a Hindu, Buddhist, whatever. That plays into it. And the fact that I'm a woman also plays into it, because they look for legislative, they see it as
one as a whole,
you know, a representative of a lot of people. But for, you know, an executive position, there's only one or two, and they are the leaders. And to be led by a woman, much less a non-Muslim woman, that does play into it.
In terms of how Indonesia political climate is and political identity, there seems to be, in a way, some people think that there's a conservative swing in Indonesia, especially with FPI and all. This is not how Indonesia kind of used to be and feel like to a lot of people. Do you think that's true, and how do you feel about that?
For sure. But here's the thing though, it isn't because of FPI. Okay, they are only the representation of. And here's the thing, FPI has a lot of different colors too. They're not just one sort or type of people. There are those in FPI that I know personally who are for, you know, unity and diversity. They have no issues with that, right? But then there are others who have a bit more problem with it. So even in organizations like that, when it's so large, not all of it is one-dimensional, right? So that's number one. Number two, I think that the conservative movement has been here all this time. It didn't go away just like that. We have had insurgencies of conservative movements.
Do you think just a case of a social media that we're more aware of the conservatism?
Yes, for sure, absolutely. And I think it's also in part because they've gotten a lot stronger. Also in part because of our education system. So they are entering our education system. They have their own schools. And so they are teaching using their own dogmas. And when it comes to that, it means that there are more and more people who think the way they do. And with the spread of information through the internet, it has made it easier for them to show how strong they are, when in fact they're still a minority here in Indonesia. But it's like, because they're so loud now.
Right, it's hard to ignore them.
It's hard to ignore them, and more people, because of the judicial system here in Indonesia that do not give the people, this is my personal opinion, as long as the judicial system does not give a sense of protection, of justice being carried out in this country, they will look for other means of justice. You know, they're saying, well, I can't depend on the law, on the legal system here in Indonesia, so I will just look at a higher power and a different belief system. And that's how the conservative movement starts to be, starts to enlarge.
Do you think the president should have kind of addressed it more? Who should be warning us about this? Like, is it something that's difficult to talk about? Because it's touching on Islam as well, right? Like, it's kind of, our politicians kind of put in a difficult situation about this, like trying to temper down this issue.
Honestly, here's the thing. I don't think that the president should speak about it, because then it gives more light. It gives them the spotlight, which was the problem in the past two elections. And what I mean by the past two is the Jakarta election and then the presidential election. The play of the identitas politik, right? Politik identitas, the identity, was mainly because there were those who were using that against certain candidates, and they were using it as a spotlight. And so it was, these groups who actually did not have a spotlight before, who weren't that strong before, all of a sudden they gained that because people in power were talking about it. So this is a little bit of it's a sensitive issue where I personally think that the tokoh-tokoh, and what I mean by tokoh-tokoh, the people the figures, the public figures, especially the religious public figures, they need to speak out a bit more about this issue, about the diversity, the unity and diversity.
The last issue that I want to talk about, what do you think of government's handling of the pandemic? Like, there's kind of this delayed response initially, right?
I had a lot of criticism. Well, number one, I think that a lot of the issue isn't so much whether or not it was enough. It was more that the inconsistency. So, from the central government, the federal government, to the local government, there wasn't a consistency of decisions, of regulations. And number two, I personally don't agree with the non-transparency.
Right. Sort of like lying to the people.
And they said that they took that on purpose. They did it on purpose because they didn't want to create panic. So they did explain that they were doing it on purpose, and I personally didn't agree with that. So I in my personal opinion, I think that we need to give people as much information and as accurate information as possible, so that the people can know how dire the situation is, what steps they need to take.
The problem is that the government doesn't want the economy to completely go to. How do you think? How do you balance that? Like, how do you think about this issue?
For sure, there's always going to be people who believe that health before money. But how do you say that to people who are dying? And I'm not saying dying because of COVID, but dying because they can't make money. So there does need to be a balance, and in a way, the only thing that could have been done differently on that point was closing the doors to people coming in from China earlier.
Right.
They didn't do that fast enough. But whether or not we should have closed the doors completely, I don't think that was realistic. But at the same time, I think the steps are, this is the thing with the new normal, right? As long as we take the protocols into place, we make sure that, we wear our masks, especially in closed environments. I'm not wearing it now because I don't have anybody around me except for one person who's wearing her mask. So, it's as long as we take those necessary protocols, the safety and regulation in place, I think we can handle this a lot better. And you know what? It's the same with the influenza. Flu, we deal with flu every day, and we deal with typhoid, and we deal with dengue fever. That's part of our lives now. So we just need to ensure that we have new ways of living.
Right. You didn't get reelected in 2019. How did that affect you, and what did you learn and want to take away from it? And what can other people learn from trying again?
One thing that needs to be explained was that I didn't get reelected not because I didn't get the votes. It was because votes were taken from me. And I brought that to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court basically rejected my case.
Right. You went along with other people.
Yeah. So not because, and a lot of us, but none of us were granted, our case. So but the reason they told my team was because of administrative issues. It wasn't because I didn't have enough evidence. It was because of administrative issues. So So in that sense, what I learned from that was that whoever wants to run, you need to have enough money to ensure you have your own witnesses. You need to have your own witnesses. You need to have your own witnesses in every single voting booth, and then you need to ensure that you give them enough fees and give them food and drink to guard the voting boxes and to guard the voting, the scores being tallied, etc., until the very end. Because otherwise, what they do is from the voting booth to when they're counting it, from one level to the next, you lose your votes.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's a little bit of technical difficulties, and
yes, I'm so sorry.
No worries. But there's a lot of things that we can discuss. We can talk.
We can do this again.
Whatever.
We can do this again.
But
we'll fight another time.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with your election.
Thank you for inviting me. See you again soon.